I sold your car to help Hannah. We desperately needed cash. Besides, it's your fault for abandoning your family in the first place. The voice coming from my smartphone was my mother's, calm, almost casual. For a moment, the meaning of her words didn't register in my brain. I leaned against the silent kitchen counter of the house I just built in Beverly Hills, doing nothing but turning her words over and over in my mind. It was about my obsidian black metallic Mercedes Benz, the first major symbol of success for the sustainable skincare brand I had built with my own hands. Every morning, when I saw its sleek body in the garage, it reminded me that I was standing on my own 2 feet. It wasn't just a means of transportation. It was a symbol of my independence. What are you talking about? You sold it? What do you mean you sold my car? I asked, barely managing to keep my composure. My mother replied, not even trying to hide her irritation. Your sister is in serious trouble. What do you expect her to do with a $50,000 debt all by herself? If you had helped her from the beginning, this would have never happened. At that moment, something inside me snapped. It was the sound of my life, my effort, my dignity, being trampled without a second thought by the person I should have been able to trust the most. Everything had started a month earlier with a phone call. It was a calm afternoon, sunlight pouring through the large windows of my new home. The house, tucked away in a quiet corner of Beverly Hills, was the embodiment of my dream. Warm floors made from reclaimed wood, cool countertops carved from natural stone. The entire space reflected my brand philosophy, harmony with nature. Standing in that physical symbol of my success, I was reviewing the final guest list for the housewarming party I planned to host the following weekend. Then I tapped Mom in my phone's contact list. We'd grown a bit distant since my father passed away, but at that time, I still couldn't imagine reaching a major life milestone without inviting my family. Kate, what a surprise! What's with this sudden call? My mother's voice carried a hint of surprise at the unexpected call, but there was none of the sharpness I had always feared might be lurking beneath. Are you doing well? I'm throwing a party next weekend for the new house. I'd really like you and Hannah to come. Well, that's wonderful. Of course we'll come. I'd love to. Her voice sounded genuinely happy. That pure warmth eased the tension in my chest, if only a little. After my father's death, our relationship had become awkward, like we were both feeling our way through unfamiliar territory. Still, maybe moments like this were when blood ties could reclaim their meaning. That faint hope brushed through my heart. Your father would have loved to see your house in Beverly Hills. It's truly impressive, Kate. You're our pride. Her voice trembled with emotion, and I replied with a shy, "Thank you. I'm really looking forward to it. But, you see..." With those words, the warmth in the air froze instantly. Here it comes, I thought, bracing myself. Pleasant conversation, nostalgic memories, words of praise. All of it had been nothing more but a prelude to what followed after that. Lately, Hannah hasn't been doing so well. Of course, your success makes her proud, but compared to how brightly you're shining, she feels like her own life isn't going anywhere. My mother's voice smoothly shifted into that of a worried parent. My success is hurting my sister. That was the unspoken message, an attempt to drive a small wedge of guilt into my heart. Did something happen with Hannah? I asked, doing my best to stay calm. On the other end of the line, I heard my mother let out a deep, calculated sigh. I hate to bring this up after such happy news, but She's gotten herself into trouble again. She's so naive. She was taken advantage of by bad people. You're the only one she can turn to now." This was her story. Hannah had racked up a massive debt through online gambling. $50,000, and the repayment deadline was fast approaching. My mother described Hannah's reckless addiction as naive, casting her entirely as a victim. Then she continued, "Ever since you moved out, she's seemed lonely somehow. Maybe she turned to unhealthy distractions to fill that emptiness. Of course, I'm not saying it's your fault, but—" She trailed off, but it was perfectly clear where her blame was aimed. Because I had abandoned my family and thrown myself single-mindedly into success, my sister had gone astray, or so she was saying. "I truly want to come and celebrate your party from the bottom of my heart. But with your sister in such a state, we can't possibly immerse ourselves in a celebratory mood while she's suffering. If you could just lend a hand, even a little, I'm sure Hannah would find a way to get back on her feet. And then, as a family, we could celebrate your new beginning with no worries at all." It was an outrageously calculated demand, one that took family love hostage. If I refused to help, I would become the cold-hearted sister who severed family ties and tarnished her own celebration. My mother was trying to bind my conscience and my public image with chains made of demands I supposedly couldn't refuse. Clutching my smartphone tightly, I closed my eyes in silence. We hadn't grown distant because of physical distance. Between us lay a deep chasm of values and ethics, one that could never be bridged. Nothing had changed since the time they burned through my father's inheritance. Back then, too, I had helped out several times using my own savings. But it hadn't helped Hannah at all. Instead of gratitude, my help had come to be seen as an entitlement, and it only accelerated her dependence. "Mom, I can't do that," I said firmly. "I've told you before. Giving her money won't help Hannah. She needs to face her own problems." "How can you say something so cold?" my mother shrieked. "She's your only sister. You have no idea how we feel. Someone like you, living comfortably after becoming so successful." Success isn't something someone handed to me. I earned it myself by working day and night. Until Hannah takes responsibility for her own life, I won't help her in any way. "That's enough!" my mother screamed hysterically. "I was stupid to rely on you. Ever since John died, you've completely changed. Ignoring your own family's suffering, how could you?" With that, she hung up on me. For a while afterward, I sat motionless on the living room sofa, completely stunned. Outside the window, the Los Angeles sunlight sparkled brilliantly, but a cold shadow had fallen over my heart. At the time, I had no way of knowing that this was merely the prologue to the nightmare that was about to unfold. All I could do was let out a deep sigh at the sheer difficulty of something called family. On the day of the housewarming party, my mother and Hannah showed up at my home with smiling faces, as if that phone argument had never happened. "It's truly wonderful, Kate," my mother said, but her eyes weren't smiling at all. Hannah, meanwhile, poured champagne for my friends as if the house were her own achievement, enthusiastically talking about how amazing it was. I felt a small sense of unease at the sight, but I was too busy greeting guests as they arrived. What really caught my attention, though, was my mother's restless behavior. With a glass in hand, she would drift away from the center of the party and wander through the house alone. She gently opened the door to my study and peeked inside, even though she wasn't showing it to anyone. She tried the doorknob leading to the garage. Once, when I ran into her in the hallway, She was hovering near the console table where my handbag was placed. "What a lovely design," she said, picking up the bag and staring at it for an unnaturally long time. Her gaze didn't look like admiration. It looked like she was assessing its value. After the party ended and I saw off the last guest, I returned to the living room to find that my mother and Hannah were already gone. As silence settled over the space that had been so lively just moments before, I realized they had left without even saying goodbye. My mother's strange behavior lingered uneasily in my mind. The way she scrutinized the house, her unnatural fixation on my belongings, but those thoughts were quickly drowned out by reality. I had an important overseas business trip coming up in just a few days, and there was far too much to do. Finalizing presentations, packing, tying up loose ends. At the time, I simply didn't have the mental space to dig deeper into that uneasy feeling. A few days later, I left for a 1-week trip abroad. When I returned, still basking in the afterglow of a successful deal, I took a taxi home, pleasantly exhausted. After resting for a bit in the living room, as evening approached, I headed to the garage to go grocery shopping at a nearby supermarket. But the moment I opened the door leading to the garage, I froze. It was empty. The Mercedes Benz that should have been there was nowhere to be seen. No trace of it at all. My mind went blank. Was it stolen? In an area known for its tight security? With trembling hands, I pulled out my smartphone and opened the app for my home security system. I fast-forwarded through the cloud-stored footage from the past week. No record of any unfamiliar visitors. Then, in the footage from the afternoon of the day after I left for my trip, I found the image that made my blood run cold. It was a familiar figure. There, clearly captured on the screen, was my mother, opening the garage door with practiced ease, getting into my Mercedes Benz, and quietly driving away. Before anger could even rise, an incomprehensible confusion swept over me. Why? How? I called my mother immediately. After several rings, she finally picked up. I forced myself to speak calmly. "Mom, where are you right now? My security camera shows you driving my car away. Can you explain what that means?" What came back through the phone was a shocking response. "I sold it to help Hannah." My mother spoke as if she had done nothing wrong. No raised voice, no hesitation, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "You wouldn't help her, so I had no choice but to do it myself." "Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea how much that car is worth? Selling someone else's property without permission is a crime." "A crime? Helping family is a crime now. Your cold-heartedness is far more sinful than anything I've done." At that point, it was no longer a conversation. Realizing that rational dialogue was impossible, I said quietly, "Give me the buyer's contact information." My mother scoffed. "No, the money's already gone. It went toward Hannah's debt. All you care about is your car. I'm truly disappointed in you." With those words, something inside me completely shut down. In a cold, flat voice, I gave her my final warning. "Fine. What you did is absolutely unforgivable. Crimes come with consequences, and you will pay them. I no longer consider you my mother." Without waiting for a reply, I hung up. I immediately contacted my longtime best friend from college and my company's legal counsel, Candace. She answered right away. In a trembling voice, I told her everything that had happened. After listening, Candace fully grasped the severity of the situation and replied in her usual calm, composed tone. "Kate, take a breath. This isn't a family dispute. It's a clear-cut case of theft. Tomorrow, We'll go to the police together and file a report." Her steady voice eased my swirling anger and confusion, if only a little. The next morning, Candace and I were at a Los Angeles Police Department precinct. I explained the situation and submitted the security footage showing my mother taking the car as evidence. Candace immediately began legal proceedings. Using her authority as an attorney, she checked records with the California DMV and confirmed that my Mercedes Benz had already been transferred into someone else's name. The title change had been completed the day after the incident. Seeing how efficiently it had been done, I became certain this wasn't an impulsive act. It was planned. A few days later, Candace identified the new owner and successfully made contact. From the speakerphone in Candace's office, we heard the slightly confused voice of the buyer, a man. "Yes, I did buy a used Mercedes Benz through a private sale. Is there some kind of problem?" After identifying herself as a lawyer, Candace spoke calmly. "There's a strong possibility that the vehicle you purchased was stolen. May I ask you a few questions about the seller?" What we learned from the man went far beyond anything I had imagined. My mother had posted ads for my Mercedes Benz on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, claiming she needed to sell quickly due to an overseas relocation. A car with a market value of around $65,000 had been listed for just $38,000, cash only. The man contacted her immediately after seeing the ad. The next day, they met in a nearby parking lot, exchanged cash, and signed the paperwork. The woman selling the car said her daughter had suddenly been assigned overseas and had asked her to handle the sale. She seemed very pleasant. I had no reason to doubt her. Then he said the decisive words. "The transfer document had your signature on it, Miss Kate, and she even showed me a copy of your driver's license. So, I didn't suspect anything." "A copy of my driver's license?" My breath caught. The image flashed back into my mind. My mother holding my handbag at the housewarming party saying, "What a lovely design." That was it. That was when she had photographed my driver's license with her phone, and while she wandered through the house, she must have skillfully stolen my car keys, registration, and insurance documents as well. Candace explained the situation to the man, who agreed to send us digital copies of the sales contract. When the documents arrived and I looked at them, I was left speechless. My name was there. At first glance, the signature looked disturbingly close to my own handwriting. But because I signed my name every single day, I could tell immediately. The signature lacked the natural fluid momentum my handwriting normally has. Instead, it had an unnatural stiffness, as if someone had carefully traced my letters stroke by stroke. The faint tremor in the lines told the real story. This wasn't written once, but practiced over and over again. This wasn't an impulsive crime. It was an act carried out after meticulous preparation, an attempt to steal my handwriting, my identity, my very existence. Candace immediately sent the data to a handwriting analysis expert she regularly worked with. The results came back within 24 hours. The report stated clearly that the pen pressure, angles, and ink flow all differed fundamentally from my genuine handwriting, concluding without ambiguity that the signature was forged. Clutching the report in Candace's office, I burned with a quiet, contained fury. This was no longer just theft. It was an unforgivable betrayal, an attempt to hijack who I was. Candace looked up from the report and met my gaze calmly. "The evidence is complete now, Kate. What do you want to do?" Not for a single second did my resolve waver. I looked straight back at her and said clearly, "I'm suing my mother." Sensing the firmness of my decision, Candace straightened and spoke seriously. "All right, but before we proceed, I need to be sure you understand this. There's no turning back from here. You'll be filing criminal charges against your own mother. The public may call you an ungrateful daughter. Even so, does your will to fight remain unchanged? I gazed out at the Los Angeles skyline beyond the window and nodded quietly. I have no doubts, Candace. She's no longer my mother. She's a criminal who tried to destroy my life. If I back down now, then my efforts, my brand, I myself, would all become lies. Candace nodded firmly in return. Understood. Then let's do this. All the way. Our decision was put into action immediately. Candace submitted the forged sales contract and the handwriting analysis report to the police as additional evidence. An official arrest warrant was then requested for my mother on charges of document forgery and theft. A few days later, at dusk, I received a call from Candace. The police took action, she said. They issued a warrant, and your mother is now in custody. Her calm report signaled the opening of a long battle. As an attorney, Candace couldn't be present at the arrest itself, but one of her agents witnessed everything. Later, Candace told me what happened, and by all accounts, it was intense. 2 police officers knocked firmly on the door of the apartment where my mother and Hannah lived. LAPD! Police! Open the door! Their voices rang out. When my mother opened the door, her face reportedly stiffened at the sight of the uniformed officers. But only for a moment. Almost immediately, she tried to slip into the role of a tragic heroine. That mask fell apart as soon as the officers called her by name and informed her that a warrant had been issued for her arrest on charges of theft and document forgery. Her face was drained of color as she began shouting an obvious lie. There's been a mistake! My daughter, Kate, gave me permission to sell the car. Beside her, Hannah, pale as a ghost, echoed the lie. That's right. My sister said it was okay to sell it to pay off my debt. She was helping her family. But their desperate lies meant nothing in the face of cold, methodical law enforcement. My mother was handcuffed on the spot and placed into a patrol car. Neighbors reportedly watched in stunned silence as she was taken away. Hannah, suspected of being an accomplice, was asked to accompany the police voluntarily to the station. According to Candace, during questioning, both my mother and Hannah continued to repeat the same false testimony. They had their story perfectly aligned. I had given my consent. As a result, prosecutors formally charged my mother with document forgery and theft. There was no longer any path forward except to uncover the truth in court. Listening to the endless stream of pathetic lies relayed to me through Candace, I felt something beyond anger, an overwhelming emptiness, and even a strange sense of pity. They were unwilling to face their crimes to the very end. They didn't truly understand the weight of what they had done. Then I would make them understand. In a court of law, in this country, what justice truly means. The legal battle ended more quietly and far more swiftly than I had imagined. The lawyer my mother hired could do little more than repeat a strained argument that this was a family financial dispute and that there had been my implicit consent. But those claims collapsed completely in the face of the evidence Candace presented. The decisive blow was, as expected, the handwriting analysis. The expert Candace called as a witness calmly and logically explained, using enlarged panels, how the signature on the transfer document was a deliberate and skillful forgery. The jurors listened in absolute silence. Then footage from my home's security cameras showing my mother calmly stealing the car was played on the large courtroom screen. A soft gasp rippled through the gallery. My mother and Hannah could only hang their heads, their faces drained of color. On the day the verdict was delivered, I sat beside Candace in the front row of the gallery. I deliberately chose a seat where I could clearly see my mother and Hannah at the defense table. I wanted to witness, with my own eyes, the end of the battle I had begun with my own hands. That was how I chose to bring closure. The courtroom fell completely silent as the judge read the verdict. Guilty of document forgery. Guilty of grand theft. Each time the word guilty was repeated, my mother's shoulders trembled slightly, and Hannah bowed her head, covering her face. Then came sentencing. The judge fixed my mother with a severe gaze. Your actions constitute an extremely malicious crime that exploited the bond of family trust, the very trust that should have been sacred. Ordinarily, this would warrant a prison sentence. At those words, my mother and Hannah went pale. My mother's attorney pleaded for leniency, but the judge's expression did not soften. Just as everyone in the courtroom became convinced that incarceration was inevitable, the judge paused and continued. However, the defendant has no prior criminal record. The offense was nonviolent, and given current prison overcrowding, the court finds that rehabilitation within the community and restitution are at this time more appropriate. Then the final sentence was announced. The court sentences the defendant to 3 years imprisonment. However, execution of this sentence is suspended for 5 years. Probation. At those words, my mother and Hannah let out faint sighs of relief. But the ruling was not over. The judge proceeded to bind them with the conditions of that probation. First, the defendants shall be jointly and severally liable to pay the victim full restitution in the amount of $65,000, the market value of the vehicle. Second, during the 5-year probationary period, the defendants shall submit to regular drug testing and mandatory counseling with a gambling addiction specialist. Third, the defendants shall comply with a permanent restraining order prohibiting any and all contact with the victim, Kate. This was not mercy. For the next 5 years, or rather until the day the restitution was fully paid, their lives would remain under judicial supervision, their freedom constrained. It was a prison without bars, and one that would last far longer. After the court adjourned, I saw my mother and Hannah in the hallway, escorted by a bailiff, glaring at me with eyes full of hatred. "This is your fault! You hypocrite!" The insults flew, but they rang hollow. The absolute restitution order and the legal reality that they could never again have anything to do with me had stripped them of their power. I said nothing. I simply turned on my heel and walked away. What I had wanted was not revenge. What I had wanted was a legal, unbreakable wall between their lives and mine, and now I had it. I stepped through the heavy courthouse doors and out into the blinding Los Angeles sunlight. As I got into the car Candace was driving, the interior felt like a different world, quiet, detached from the courtroom behind us. When the car smoothly merged onto the main road, Candace spoke softly with her hands on the wheel. "You really fought this through, Kate." Her voice wasn't that of a lawyer. It was warm, filled with understanding, the voice of a friend who knew everything. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said. She shook her head gently. "No, you're the one who stood on your own feet and made every decision. What will you do now?" Watching the cityscape pass by outside the window, I let out a deep breath for the first time in months. I'm going home, to my sanctuary, my real one. Candace said nothing while smiling softly. Several months after the verdict, my life had fully returned to a state of calm. Then one day, Candace contacted me. "This is the final legal update," she said. When I visited her office, she showed me a single document. It was the official settlement statement from the sale of my mother's and Hannah's house. As expected, Hannah's creditors foreclosed on the property, Candace explained. And look here. She pointed to a line item that clearly stated that $65,000, the full amount of restitution, had been paid to me first from the proceeds of the sale. This legally completes your restitution. Then she added, the remaining money went to Hannah's creditors, but it was barely a drop in the bucket. Most of their original debt is still there. I looked quietly at the document. It was nothing more than a list of cold, emotionless numbers. And yet, it was the most eloquent proof imaginable of the end of my fight and my complete victory. I thanked Candace deeply and left her office. About a month later, she called me again. Just a bit of gossip, she said, prefacing her words before speaking in her usual matter-of-fact tone. My mother and Hannah, having lost their house, are now living alone together in a cheap apartment on the other side of the city. Hannah took a minimum wage job for the first time in her life to repay her remaining debt, but she couldn't hold on to any job for long and kept bouncing from one to another. My mother, her wrongdoing now known throughout the neighborhood, has been abandoned by all her former friends. Now, Candace said, they spend their days blaming each other for everything. You can call it nothing but karma, Candace concluded. I nodded quietly. Even hearing all that, my heart remained strangely calm. Their lives now belong to a distant world, one that will never again intersect with my story. And now, I'm pouring my passion into a new project. Through my skincare brand, I've established a foundation that donates a portion of its profits to support women suffering from family exploitation, including financial abuse. My experience was not wasted. It has become a light of hope for other people who carry the same pain.